We want to mention just a couple other things real quick. Shorty is not here this evening. Linda said when it's windy and rainy, and she's a little nervous about walking, so I think she night for her to be out. So we certainly do miss her, and hopefully we'll be able to see her again on Sunday. I wanted to mention something as well. On Friday night, this past Friday night, Will had a football game in Harrisburg. And so we went, and I was going down the steps to the bathroom, and I saw Adam Hopkins, which is Sue Ann's son. And I thought, that guy looks really familiar because I wasn't thinking about seeing him. And so we stood down at the bottom of the steps and talked for the whole halftime. I never did get to the bathroom, I don't think. And then he came up and sat with us all in the bleachers. But while we were down there talking, he told me, he said he thanked me, but he thanked the church here for taking Sue Ann in and loving on her. And I told him, I said, well, I think she's been better for us than we've even been for her. So, it was very sweet of him to say it, and I was tickled to death and love Sue Ann dearly, and glad to have you with us. John Mason was there as well, and he's in college, and so he was visiting with a few friends, and then he came back and sat with us a little later as well. On the screen here, you'll see that the lesson tonight is titled Life in the Promised Land. That's what they've all been titled. But specifically, Gideon defeats the Midianites. And I'm guessing that you'll be familiar with this story, but Will asks me every time, he says, what's the title to put back on the computer? And I said, Gideon defeats the Midianites. And he spelled it wrong, and the little thing popped up and said, correct it. And so the one that corrected, it corrected not to Midianites, but it corrected to mundanities. And the word mundane, if you know, means kind of boring or sort of normal or plain. And this is like the absolute opposite of defeating the mundanities right here. There is nothing sort of normal or plain at all about the story that we're going to talk about this evening here. But we're going to be in the book of Judges. In particular, pretty much the whole chapter of Judges, chapter 7, in some form. And normally, I start you off with a question, but we're not really going to do that here this evening. But we are going to talk a bit about Gideon. I've told you that we're covering this, and we're skipping ahead just a little bit. And so in order to make this work, we have to bypass a little bit. But I do need to give you a little bit of background. And so who was Gideon? Well, it's in the book of Judges, and that tells you something. He's a judge. He was a military leader. We'll see that here as we go forward. I guess we could use the word prophet would work here. But his most famous account is the victory over the Midianites. You may be familiar with the word Gideon. That's an organization. If you've ever stayed in a hotel, there's a Bible that's in the drawer, and it's placed by a group called the Gideons. And so that may be a word if you're not necessarily familiar with the story. But building up to this, as we so often see, the Israelites have done wrong, and they've kind of, for every good deed they do, they end up sort of messing things up. And so they have been delivered into the hands of the Midianites. We've talked about this, that when they come into the promised land, it was not an empty house. There were groups that were there. And so they had to sort of fight into this area and sort of reestablish themselves. And a couple of groups that they run into are the Midianites, who we'll talk about tonight, which Joshua talked about with those. These are nomadic tribes, and they live east of the Jordan River. And so the area there still today, what we would call Jordan and Syria would be the area that they're in. And in Judges 6, which is what Dad read from just a few minutes ago, you can read that they invaded the land of the Israelites, destroyed their crops and their animals, and forced many people to hide in caves and hide in dens. And they took over and sort of dominated the people for about 7 years. I can see why. Why might the Israelites, in your opinion, have been a good target for another group to attack? Why might they have been an appealing target for a group to attack? So they've been depleted and defeated. Yeah. We use the word army, but it's more like a traveling group of people that also had some army, but also maybe didn't. Certainly hard to describe them as this big, powerful military entity. Why else might they have been attacked? All of these groups are nomadic too that we're talking about. And the concept of a nomad is you're going from place to place. If you're familiar with the area, maybe you've seen it on TV or something like that, it's not exactly, to borrow a biblical phrase, not exactly a land of milk and honey. It's sort of disputed and divided resources. And so if I can defeat you and I can take control of the land that you claim, then that gives me a little more power and a little more resources and all of that as well. Eventually, Israel will make this cry out to God. That they will realize, well, every other time we've been in trouble, we could ask God for help. Now, they seem to forget that they can ask as they're going, but we'll leave that there for the time being. And so God will send a prophet to work with them, to talk with them, to sort of reprove them. Maybe that's the word that we want to use. And they're reminded that this is not the first time that they've been delivered from trouble. If you were to take your right hand right now and put it into the fold of your Bible, everything back to the left is chock full of Israelites getting in trouble and God helping them out. But yet we don't have to turn too many pages before they're back into some other form of trouble as well. God reminds them in chapter 6 that they went into this area, and the one thing that they said beforehand, they said, when you go into this area, don't fall into worshiping the gods or the idols of the other groups. And they fall right into that, right? They sort of merge, and there's some marriages and some things like that that are often talked about there as well. And so finally, the Lord will send an angel to tell Gideon that he's going to have to help save Israel from the Midianites. And he assures them that the Lord is going to be with them. Now, this is where we're going to start this evening. And we're going to see here that Gideon will hear this information and he will react in many ways, probably the way you would react. His responsibility is to defeat the army of this prevailing power. And he's going to have to do it in a term that we might use today, with one hand tied behind his back. As we read this, it might be more like two hands and maybe a foot tied behind his back when it's all said and done right here. And so we're going to look at this, and you may see, I want you to think about, the faith that will be necessary for him. We're going to be, our readings are all on the screen. They're a little bit longer tonight just in order to make it work. But this is Judges chapter 7. Verses 1 through 8. And Maria, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind to read this for us, dear. to look first, and you'll need to look back at the verse, probably the first, second, or third verse will be where you'll find it. But we see on from the beginning that there was a plan by God to reduce the army of Gideon. And why? And there's a reason given. We're not worried about the method that they reduced it, just the reason. What was the reason that God said to Gideon that we need to reduce the army? In there with 30,000 soldiers and they win, they're going to say, look how strong and powerful we are. So as Ben said right there, he said they're going to take away any, sort of perceived advantage that they would have. And so that's from the get-go. Now, what you'll notice then is they used a couple of methods to reduce the group. The first method was pretty much a simple question. Are you afraid of this mission? It's not exactly how it's worded, but that's what it means. And it said that a sizable amount, I believe it said 22,000, said yes. And I'm not here to debate why they said yes or no, doesn't matter. But they probably had families, they probably had whatever it might be. Maybe they didn't have the faith that they needed, but whatever it was, we see that Gideon seems to say, all right. So we've whittled the number down. Well, if they started with 32,000 and now it's down to 10, what's a potential problem here? Well, for God, what might be, what would happen if you reduced any army from 32,000 to 10,000? They don't have as many. I'm not asking a hard question. I think they don't have near as many people. So we would look at this and say, ooh, that's not enough. But maybe 10,000 is enough. Maybe we could still make it work, but we don't stop there then. Then God says, okay, we're going to go down to the water and do what? Test how they drink. It doesn't really say anything about it. They just go down there because they're going to need a drink of water. And he mentions a couple of different ways. And the ones that do what, he would send away. And the ones that did what, he would keep. Laugh like a dumb. Yeah. So when we read this, we think, okay, well, that seems kind of odd. But it really isn't that different of a way of just saying, all right, when people walk in the building, do they turn left or right? Might do that. When people sit down, do they put a leg up or they put it down? All it is just a way to divide people. Now, I'm going to let Ben speak here for a second. He doesn't know this, but Ben taught this class a while back. And Ben, you gave, and I can't remember exactly what the reason was that you gave, but what was the perception as to maybe why they kept one group and didn't keep another group?
Speculation is that the one group that's on their hands would be getting down, they're not being guarded, they're not really ready for a fight. They're letting the guard out, whereas the one that's still refusing to let go of the weapon and just holding one hand to drink that would be your hardcore true soul.
Absolutely. So we've whittled it down now to 300. And no matter what you thought about 32,000 or 10,000, 300 just is not enough, right? That is not a very big number for us to look at. So I want us to think for a second. We'll come back to that in just a minute. But what do we notice about Gideon in these 8 verses that Maria read? What do you notice about his reaction to these requests that have been put on him? Takes a lot of faith. Uh-huh.
And they come in and said, okay, we get all right to take your 32 weeks short. We'll march out here, we're going to get you here, you're going to get on the plane, you're going to talk. We didn't know if there's anybody who's coming. Well, about more than 2/3 of the group raised their hand.
Right.
And they said, okay, well, come on with us. Which we didn't know what was going on. And I was sitting there looking at the 10 or 12 that are left out of 60 people. And I was like, how in the world are we going to be?
Right.
But we found out later they were just making a point.
Right.
The guys out there that said they didn't want to go. And
Sounded better than saying then, didn't it? So Gideon, we just said, is a military leader. And I would imagine that any military leader presented with cutting your force down to a third is probably going to think, well, this is going to affect my strategy, right? And you might look at this and think, this doesn't seem right. But then he gets told again, reduce it again. And so there has to be like this sort of inner battle, because Sue Ann said there was clearly faith, but there's also the military side of him that thinks, boy, this is a little thin here, right? We're a little thin with it. Now, before we go any further, I want us to consider this question. Do Christians sometimes rely too much on things like numbers, resources, and appearances? What are some ways that maybe Christians do this, or we lean too heavy on these things? How big the building is, how much money is in the offering. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh-huh. Sure. I'm actually that's like the total opposite of what I was thinking about with numbers. But when I was thinking about it, is sometimes I'll give you an example. For a few years, Mary and I went to the Richmond Church of Christ. There were about 350 people that were there typically on a Sunday morning. And it was real easy to think, well, he'll lead the singing and he'll do the preaching and I didn't have to do anything. And it was real easy to just sit back and say, well, there's 350 people here. There's plenty of people here to get it done. What's the problem, though, with that? And I'm not disparaging 350 people. I'm just saying, what's the potential problem? Don't get any experience. The same people may be doing the same thing every time, which is fine, but you can do the same. You can have 3 people do everything in a group of 15 or a group of 100 or a group of 1,000. And so sometimes I think we do look at numbers and it can make us maybe get a little lazy, a little lackadaisical, and resources and appearances. Any other thoughts on that? Maybe especially the appearances one. Could be. Big and fancy. Mm-hmm. Sure. Any others? Could be. So there's any number of things here that go ahead. Really? Uh-huh. It's easy, it's easy to maybe fall into that. And so we have to sort of stay focused. And I would imagine that when Gideon's numbers have been whittled down to 300, focus is going to be a real 30,000, or if we're going in with 300, there's a big difference in, I can slack off if I'm part of 30,000 soldiers maybe, but 3,000 maybe not. And so you're going to have to focus in a little bit more on. So God has reduced the army here. And so as you might imagine, there's probably a little bit of nerves in Gideon. So we're going to read Judges chapter 7, verses 9 through 15. Melvina, do you care to read this one, please? Pura. All right. So if we go back to verse 9, what Mel read there just a second ago, it said, it happened on the same night that the Lord said to him, arise, go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But verse 10, it says, but if you are afraid to go down to the camp with pure if you are afraid to. And so what purpose does God tell Gideon to go down to this enemy camp? To get a little courage, right? There's fear, and we just said, why might there be a little bit of fear? Why might there be a little lack of courage, even if faith exists?
Most of these people have never been in soldier. Most of them probably never been in a fight. And he's got nothing really going for him other than God's word.
Mm-hmm. So he goes down, and it's almost like there's a little eavesdropping type story as well. And he hears this interpretation of this dream. And we'll get back to that in just a second. But if you look, I forgot I had a second question up there. If you look at this, what does this maybe tell us about God's patience with our fears?
He doesn't expect 100%. He knows that we're always going to have doubts in our mind. It's like the man who went to Jesus for healing. He said, Lord, I believe, help me with all this. There's nothing wrong with questioning and having fears and stuff like that, as long as we take it into God and don't let confess your fears.
Sure. Leland, if you were going to preach on Sunday, you think you'd be nervous before you stepped up there? It's only natural, right? We wouldn't say, well, no, I wouldn't be nervous about it all. We would be nervous in that situation. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't be capable of doing it. That's not what it means. Some worries. And so this worry that may be building up in Gideon, if he doesn't do anything about it, come the morning, he might say, whoa, I slept on this and 300 ain't enough. We can't do it. But instead, he goes down, he hears this, and he hears in the camp the story, and he's like, oh, I see now maybe how God is going to work this out. Go ahead, Joe. Sure. Sure. There are countless examples of fear in the Bible, and there are countless examples of God helping with that. It's not wrong for you to be fearful. It's not wrong for you to be nervous. It's not wrong for us to be anxious or worried. And I think sometimes we fail at that. We say, you shouldn't let this bother you. Well, I don't think you need everything that comes up to bother you, but by the same token, it's only human for us to experience this. And so we have to lean on God, but also, you got to be like kind of where Gideon was here, that he was a little bit nervous as well. Once Gideon hears the story, not the story, I guess, but here's the interpretation of this dream. This is the whole point of going down here. It said that he worshiped. Why do you think, first of all, what do you think that means? And second of all, why is that important for what I have said here as preparing for spiritual battles, but essentially any difficulty that's facing us in life?
His patience, like you said, with all these things, we're using it and giving him all these things and saying it.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way. That's maybe a better word for us to understand it, as a gratefulness and a thankfulness for it. We tend to think about worship as sort of this larger setting. But yes, there's certainly a level of thanks that we see there. So now let's bring it to us. All of us have experienced trials and difficulties. So why is worship, or to use maybe the word there, gratefulness and thankfulness and leaning on God, why is that an important part for us when we're dealing with difficulties? Uh-huh.
So we're kind of facing the same life here. We face Satan in the world and all that's out there. We can't overcome that. It's impossible in battle. It's like 300 conquerors of army. When we take the focus on the problem, when we take the focus off ourselves, and put it on God by worshiping God, then we see the way.
There are a bunch of different pamphlets and tracts and things like that in the back. And I'm going to say this, and I don't know if this is actually something that's back there or not. But how many of you have ever seen pamphlets or something along those lines is that if you're dealing with this, read this verse or this chapter? Anybody ever seen that? And it's not maybe a perfect simulation of what you're dealing with, but what is the purpose of, okay, if you're dealing with this, go read chapter 6, verses 10 to 15. What's the purpose of something like that? To give comfort, strength, encouragement, to explain. And you can see that, sometimes we do think that, well, I'm the only person who's ever dealt with this, but maybe not. And maybe you find an example of somebody that could. And so that worship, comfort. I want you to answer this question. I just want you to say yes or no to this. Let me reword it. Has God ever encouraged you in moments of uncertainty? Yeah. It's probably not like a word straight down, hey, Ben, but the things that we've studied, the things that we think about, the things that we consider, that's how that we can maybe be encouraged as well. Go ahead, Joe. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Had to work around it. He had to manage. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Well, it doesn't make sense that Gideon would only have 300 people. That's an Old Testament thorn in the flesh for a military leader for sure. But he's going to have to work around it, right? And we can maybe see the same thing. So let's go back to this battle plan. We're going to look at Judges chapter 7. This is verses 16 through 22. Ben, do you care to read this for me, sir?
Then he divided 300 men into 3 companies, but a trumpet into every man's hand with a kitchen pitcher, and torches inside the pitcher. And he said to them, Look at me and do what watch. When I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. And I know who are with me, and you shall blow your trumpet on every side of the whole camp, and say, the sword of the Lord of Gideon. So Gideon and 100 men who were with him came to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle of the watch. Just as they had posted the watch, they blew the trumpet and broke the pitcher that were in their hand. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitcher. They held the torches in their left hand, and the trumpets in their right hand were blown. And they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And every man stood in his place all around the camp. And the whole army ran and cried out and fled. When the 300 blew their trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. The army fled to Acacia towards Zerah and as far as the border of Avon, Mahal, and by attack.
All right. So we see here this story. And first of all, we talked a minute ago about limiting the numbers, and we all would agree that limiting the numbers would seem to make this a more challenging battle, right? We went from 30,000 to 300. So that would appear to be a challenge. However, we just read the strategy, and it said that he took the 300, divided them into 3 companies, right? And gave them what? What did each man have? Had a trumpet and a pitcher with what in it? With a torch, right? And they each got one. And it said they did what? What did he do with them? They all went and stood right beside each other in a corner, right? What'd they do? Moved them around. So when we, and so what they're, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. But besides limiting the numbers, I think sometimes we tell this story as like, well, this is an odd strategy. It's really not an odd strategy at all. They're taking a small amount of them what? Look bigger. look noisier, look louder. It said they did this in the middle watch. This is in the middle of the night. Would they have looked as intimidating at noon? Probably not. What did I just hear? What's that noise out there, right? All the time, but like when we're about 3/4 out of it, we don't know what that is, right? And you look out, and you ever been at home and you've been asleep and somebody drives by and the headlights come in, you think, well, it's a parade out there. They just keep going by. It's one car. Noise and light sort of mess with us whenever we are there in. Now, we've got a game plan here. Everything good, okay, guys? All right. Gotcha. All right. So we've got a game plan, picture, all that kind of stuff. Why was it important that they follow the plan meticulously? Who in here would have accidentally put the torch out before time? Who do you think would have been most likely to have done that? All right. So we got to follow they had to follow the rules right here. Go ahead. Uh-huh. Yes. Uh-huh. So the whole point of this is that there's going to be it's going to intimidate as best as possible. And so you go at night, middle of the night, people they're not quite ready for it. There's a lot of noise that's coming here from it. And that's what we see there within the story. So for us, this last question, how does the church today show unity and obedience the same way that Gideon's army did back then?
By everybody doing their part. It's a living building made of living stones. Everybody's got their place in church. And maybe if one stone breaks, another stone takes its place.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to make sure that we're all doing everything we can and working together. And also that we're fixing and replacing those stones that maybe are decaying or whatever.
Mm-hmm. What else?
If people start missing, it hurts the whole church.
Mm-hmm.
It's discouraging.
Mm-hmm. What else?
We are consistent on Paul's gospel.
Mm-hmm.
We preach to people all the time. We're going to do what God's word says. We don't want our opinion. We don't want what men say or politics. We want to do what God says. And that's what they do. And that's what we exist.
Truth be told, 299 torches instead of 300 probably wouldn't have been noticeable, right? But if one person doesn't do what the others did, people would have remembered it, right? Remember when we went and defeated the Midianites and Melvina's torch went out before it was supposed to? We'd have talked about that forever, right? So we had to make sure that, and so when we think about this, everybody's sort of pulling on the rope in the same direction. And if not, it'll cause us to say, well, he should have been doing this or she should have been doing that. We'd have been more successful, blah, blah. It doesn't take long to sort of spiral into that kind of thought. And so we have to make sure that we're united, we're following the rules, that we're doing what we're supposed to do, but everybody is pulling in the same direction. Other thoughts before we go to the last spot?
One more thing I've always thought that we don't understand darkness anymore because we live in a world that's covered with light, okay? You drive down the interstate, there's light from the interstate. These people live in a world that's very, very dark. I don't know how much what this is about, but they're not moving how they are. And it looked like that all these lights came off at one time. This was a big deal.
Yeah.
That made it more horrific.
If you go all the way back to the beginning, it says that they were camped in a valley. And so if you're surrounding a valley, you're going to be kind of halfway up the hill. And that certainly would make it it would have been noticeable as well. It says that they storm in, they sort of defeat them, they run them off. It says they pursued them. And that's actually what we're going to finish with, is that in Judges chapter 7, verses 23 to 25. Shelby, you care to finish it off for us? So that's where the story ends, which is kind of a wild ending there to it. But I want us to think about the following through of it. So let's say that the chapter ended at verse 22. Let's say that we just stopped at verse 22 and 23, 24, and 25 don't exist. There's no pursuit of the leaders who were of the enemy. What's likely to happen when Oreb and Zeb go over, a couple of towns over and nobody pursues them?
They're going to get reinforcements. They're going to call in neighboring kings that they've got treaties with. They're going to say, hey, come help us fight.
So it was important then for Gideon to follow through with what would appear to be, at the end of verse 22, a pretty significant victory, but to go on and sort of finish it. Now, I need us to sort of change mindsets here for just a second, because I'm asking this question not about going and killing Oreb and Zeb. That's not what I'm asking. But why is it important to follow through things spiritually? And maybe better yet, what are some things that we have to follow through spiritually?
I think of the example Jesus gave. He said, when a evil spirit is cast out of a person, and that place is swept and clean, but something can feel back into that. He said, then that spirit returns and sends another spirit in their work. So it's not just enough to get the victory. We've got to fill our hearts with the spirit, with the word, and things and stay in the heart.
Okay. What else?
Well, we've talked about it before. A lot of times, people are baptized, and they think they're done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the beginning of the journey. We know that's all Christ is.
Mom, did he take yours? Uh-huh.
If you have wrong someone, if you've done something wrong, then you need to make that right.
Uh-huh.
And therefore, that's not what it is. Just like obeying God, that's what we were supposed to do. Once you become a Christian, then you can be faithful. You don't just become a Christian and just leave it. But that's what you have to realize there's far more things that is your salvation and perfection.
So if we look, there's sort of a personal follow through that we all have to do, but there's also a church follow through that we would do for others there as well. So I think Mom said, she said really well right there, not leave it undone. You have any projects at home that are undone that you started and you just didn't get done with them, whatever they might be? I noticed the way we're laughing here makes me think there maybe are some. And what do we often say about that thing in the garage or that thing in the basement that we started a few months ago and we've not finished? What do we say? When are we going to do it? Probably do it Saturday. We'll get to it tomorrow. Once I get done with this or that. Do we ever say things like that in church? Of course. We ever say that in our sort of Christian lives? Of course we do. I'll do it then, or I'll do this, or I'll do that. And when we don't follow through, well, then it never gets done, right? It never. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So how can our courage, going through whatever it might would be, inspire others to act for God? And I ask this because Gideon had to lead the group, right? And Gideon went down and he heard the dream interpreted, and he sort of led them. But no matter what, he still had to have the 300 people with him. They had to follow through as well. So how can we be Gideon in our life?
Stepping out of our comfort zone and get busy, go and work on it. And you see this with youth, all kinds of church will want you to go forward. It won't just be one. Fire and courage because this person stepped out. And we've got to not be afraid to be that pathfinder, to break that trail and step out of our comfort.
Any others?
Well, I bet if it's here, I would see me, and I think as young Christians, we should say, I'm ready to do what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you count on me.
Yeah.
I'll provide it, and I'll do it.
I've said this before, but I enjoy watching people do things in church the first time. Sort of make a mental note, and then the second time, and the third time, and I will say that I would imagine the first time that I walked up here in front of you, I was teeth chattering and holding on tight, and I don't have that as much, anymore. But the reason being is that the more we do something, right? But I also sort of modeled myself after people that I had seen do it, and I hope that we would do the same thing, that we would know that we are in some cases the model for maybe our children or our friends or our coworkers or neighbors or whoever it would be. Now, back at the very beginning of the story, chapter 7, verse 2, I think it was, or 3, that God said, in my words here, if we're not careful, they'll take all the credit in the world, right? So this was a story, this was a event done to give the glory to who? Give the glory to God. How do we need to remember that? Why do we need to remember that? Pretty easy to slip into that. Look what I can do, right? Or look what she can do or he can do.
There's things we can do that God didn't give us the ability to do. So we've got no reason to boast or brag about it.
Others?
Good friend, a lot of ways, if you tell a good sermon preach, whatever, he will say, praise the Lord.
Uh-huh.
And he is deflecting the glory from the strength of God. I think that's a nice thing.
Mm-hmm.
He is making sure that no one else needs.
Right. Others?
And if we do that, and we will never get too high,
Right.
we will always understand our position.
Sure. So this story reminds us from the get-go that the battle is not necessarily ours, right? But as the song says, the battle belongs to the Lord. And I'm guessing that you have in some point in your life felt outnumbered. At some point in your life, you felt overwhelmed. And at some point in your life, you've probably thought, I don't know if I have the strength to be able to do this, right? But the word that we mentioned there is I, right? Well, we may not on that strength. And so Gideon, if me or you were Gideon, we probably would have looked at this and thought, boy, this feels like you're making it tough on me, right? This feels like you're making it difficult on me. This is making us weak. But as Dad took from me there just a minute ago, he said, when I'm weak, then I'm strong. And I'm sure that when this battle was over, when it was all said and done, that the children of Israel walked away thankful for what God had done for them. And I hope that when we get to the finish line of whatever battle we have to fight, that we walk away saying the same thing. As we'll see, they'll make more mistakes. We've got 3 more lessons, and it's the roller coaster. They never really get off the roller coaster here, but we'll see that they, at least for tonight, they have come away victorious. If there's any way that we can help you, anything that we can do for you, we always invite you to come while we stand and sing.